Why was everyone laughing? That was the first thing Sarah Campbell noticed, not the smoke, not the ringing in her ears, not even the weight of her rifle slipping from her hands, just the laughter, cruel, short, too easy. The training hall was filled with it. Moments ago, a simulated flashbang had gone off inside the concrete kill house, a thunderclap trapped in stone, a blinding pulse, a wall of smoke, and then that strange silence that always followed too quickly after chaos. The recruits hit the ground, scrambling, shouting. Everyone except her. Staff Sergeant Sarah Campbell froze in the doorway. Her rifle clattered onto the floor, echoing against the walls like an accusation. "Someone get the tourist out of the door before she hurts herself," Lieutenant David Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the haze like a knife. The recruits laughed. It came fast, sharp, and easy, the kind of laughter that feeds on weakness. The instructor's whistle pierced the air, slicing the moment clean in two. Simulation failed. Campbell, that's 3 today. No one said anything after that. Sarah stooped, picked up her rifle, checked the chamber. Her face didn't change, no anger, no shame, no visible fear. Just calm, mechanical focus. The kind that unsettles people who mistake silence for fragility. Hayes smirked. "You sure you're wearing the right uniform, Sergeant?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. She just walked past him, slow, deliberate, her silence speaking a language older than pride. That night in the barracks, the whispers multiplied. "She's broken," someone said. "PTSD case. Should have stayed behind a desk." The rumor spread like mold in damp air. But rumors don't see what the quiet hides. Sarah Campbell was 35 years old. Every inch of her body carried the kind of stillness that comes from surviving things too heavy to explain. Compact, wiry, built like someone who never stopped running, even after crossing the finish line. A pale scar traced over her left shoulder, disappearing beneath the fabric of her shirt. Her eyes gray, steady, almost too calm, scanned rooms without moving her head, measuring exits, angles, distances. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice was measured, low and clear. 2 tour in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. After her last mission, she'd been pulled from active duty for medical rehabilitation. What was meant to be a temporary reassignment had quietly turned into years of administrative limbo. Now she was back at Fort Arden, not as a warfighter, but as a returning veteran needing recertification. Officially, this was a formality. Unofficially, everyone knew what it meant. When command wanted to make someone disappear from the system, they sent them here. To fade quietly. Lieutenant David Hayes made sure that didn't happen quietly. He was early 30s, sharp-jawed, polished boots, eyes always hungry for approval. A walking recruitment poster. His team, Peters, Torres, and Miller, mirrored his energy, ambitious, loud, and fiercely loyal to their lieutenant. For them, Sarah was a problem to be solved. A stain on their perfect record. "She slows us down," Hayes told the instructors after every failed simulation. "I'm all for second chances, but she's not combat ready." The words traveled through the barracks like wind, through a crack in the door. Every meal, every corridor, every silence between drills, she could feel them, the glances, the muttered jokes. Sarah never argued, never defended herself. She just showed up on time, precise, methodical. Her rifle was spotless, her corner of the barracks immaculate, every piece of gear lined up perfectly, magazines numbered, medical kit packed tight enough to pass inspection by touch alone. The others called it obsession. Chief Master at Arms Thomas Raines called it something else. He'd been in the service long enough to tell the difference between fear and control. Tall, weathered, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. Raines was the kind of man who could see truth in how a soldier stood when no one was looking. He'd seen Sarah flinch once, when that training grenade went off, but he'd also seen her catch a falling rifle midair, reflexively, before it hit the ground. He'd seen her fix a broken optic in seconds, without tools. He'd noticed she never left her back exposed, not even during lunch. Paranoia. No. Memory. That night, Rains walked into the training hall long after lights out. The floodlights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. And there she was, hair tied back, no helmet, hands moving in a rhythm that wasn't for anyone else to see. Drop mag, reload, rack, dry fire, reset again. Every movement flowed like water. No hesitation, no noise, just precision, clean, silent, almost reverent. He watched from the doorway, saying nothing. Soldiers revealed themselves in their solitude, he'd learned. Some broke, some pretended. Sarah Campbell didn't do either. He finally stepped forward. She froze for half a breath, then straightened. "Evening, Master Chief," she said quietly. "What are you training for?" he asked. "Tomorrow's test or something else?" She gave a faint, tired smile, the kind only soldiers wear when they've answered that question too many times. "Just keeping my hands honest, sir." He nodded. He understood. Sometimes keeping your hands busy is the only way to keep your mind quiet. He left her there, the rhythm of her movements echoing behind him, like a heartbeat inside the empty hall. The next morning, gray light crept over Fort Arden. Another live fire simulation. "Try not to break formation this time, tourist," Hayes called out. Peters laughed, Torres smirked. Miller, the quiet one, just looked away. Sarah didn't respond. She checked her rifle, chambered a round, tapped the forward assist, and stared downrange. Rains watched from the catwalk above, arms folded, unmoving. He'd seen soldiers bluff before, seen them shake or fake calm, but what Sarah carried wasn't fear or arrogance, it was something older. The timer beeped. Hayes shouted, "Go, go, go." Smoke muzzle flashes, commands echoing. Sarah moved last, measured, careful, scanning each corner before stepping in. Her hesitation cost the team seconds. "Too many." "Simulation failed," the evaluator said flatly. Hayes ripped off his helmet, threw it down. "You're gonna get someone killed, Campbell." Torres muttered, "Hero of the backline." Peters laughed. Miller tried not to. Sarah said nothing. Her jaw tightened once, then she went still again. By week's end, the jokes had settled in like parasites. Every time she fired, someone had a comment ready, even when she hit center mass. "Beginner's luck." Even a broken clock's right twice a day. During formation drills, her delay meant simulated casualties. The red sensors on their vests blinked mockingly, digital reminders of her mistakes. Hayes rolled his eyes after every run. "Every time she's in formation, someone dies," he said. Torres grinned, "Except her." No one corrected him. In the cafeteria, Sarah sat alone at the far end of the table. The air around her buzzed with laughter, trays clattering, voices loud and careless. Her fork moved slowly, methodically, every bite deliberate, like an act of discipline. At the other end, Hayes leaned back in his chair, twirling his fork. "Think she's even trying?" Peters shrugged. "Some people just hit their ceiling." Torres grinned. "Or maybe she was never built for it." Laughter again. "Short, dull, mean." Sarah didn't look up. She stopped needing to. Because she knew something they didn't, that her exhaustion didn't come from failure. It came from restraint. Every pause, every delayed shot, every careful movement was a war inside her. A fight against the instinct she had spent years suppressing. Because once, on a mission she never talked about, she hadn't hesitated. And the aftermath had left her, with a scar she could still feel under her sleeve. So she held back, even when her body screamed to move. That night when the base lights dimmed and the others slept, she returned to the hall. The air smelled of oil and dust. She loaded blanks, ran the course in silence. Magazine drop, reload, fire, slide. Breathe, move. Each movement exact, fluid, like choreography written in discipline and pain. From the catwalk above, Rains watched again, unseen, unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't need to. Because what he saw wasn't fear. It was control. Deliberate, brutal control. When she finished, she holstered her rifle, turned off the lights and walked away. He stayed behind, staring into the dark, the faint hum of the bass filling the silence. He knew the look of a soldier pretending. He also knew the look of someone waiting. And Sarah Campbell wasn't failing. She was waiting for something none of them understood yet. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of cordite and rain. In the distance, the flag rustled against the pole. Fort Arden slept, its walls heavy with stories unspoken. Inside, one woman trained alone, her shadow slicing through the light, patient, silent, and unreadable. Because somewhere deep down, in the part of her that never stopped listening for orders, she still heard an echo. 2 words she hadn't heard in years. 2 words she'd been trying to forget. But soon they would return. And when they did, the entire base would learn that some soldiers don't fail. They're simply waiting for permission to be who they really are. The dawn broke over Fort Arden like a slow exhale. Pale light stretched across the training field, revealing the scars of yesterday, spent casings, torn tape, footprints that told stories of failure and fatigue. Sarah Campbell was already awake. She hadn't slept. She rarely did before evaluations. Instead, she'd sat by the window, her uniform folded neatly beside her, watching the flag outside stir in the cold wind. She told herself it was just another test. Just another day to survive quietly. But a part of her, the part she fought hardest to silence, knew better. Today mattered. The briefing room smelled of sweat and disinfectant. Lieutenant Hayes leaned against the front table, posture sharp, confidence even sharper. "All right, people," he began, his voice cutting through the fatigue. "This is the last field evaluation before certification. You know the rules: clear the compound, secure all 6 objectives, 0 casualties. Fastest team sets the bar." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "Try not to break formation this time, Campbell. We'd like to make it to lunch alive." Peters smirked, Torres chuckled. Even Miller, the quiet one, looked away to hide his grin. Sarah adjusted the strap of her vest. Her hands didn't shake, her face didn't change. "Understood, sir." Rain stood near the back, clipboard in hand, saying nothing. He'd learned to read the air in rooms like this, the way respect bent, the way it cracked. He didn't like what he saw in Hayes's tone, but he said nothing. Observation came first, judgment later. Outside, the field glittered with frost. Engines rumbled. The transport truck waited, olive drab, old, reliable. Sarah climbed in last, her rifle slung across her chest, the cold biting through her gloves. The men filled the benches with easy talk, trading jokes about speed and kill counts. She stared out the open back, the world rolling by in a blur of gray and dust. The truck halted with a groan. Hayes jumped down first. "Let's do this clean," he said, stretching his neck. "Try to keep up, Sergeant." Sarah followed, her boots crunching on gravel. She could feel eyes on her, the unspoken expectation of failure pressing on her shoulders like a weight. From his perch on the observation tower, Chief Rains watched silently. He knew what the others didn't, that Sarah had already been marked for discharge. The paperwork sat in a drawer somewhere, half-signed, waiting for today's outcome. He hated how routine it all felt. How quietly they erased people. The air buzzed with static as the timer armed. "On my mark," Hayes shouted, 3, 2, 1, go. They moved. Torres took point, Peters on the flank, Miller running support. Sarah brought up the rear, scanning corners, movements tight and efficient. The first target popped up, a human silhouette. Torres fired, hit. Second target, Peters, hit. Third target, Sarah's lane. She hesitated. Not for long, maybe a heartbeat, but enough. The red light above the dummy blinked, missed. Too slow, Hayes barked. Jesus, Campbell, you're killing us. They pressed on, clearing rooms, shouting coordinates. Every step was a blur of noise and commands, but Sarah's focus tunneled, every sound too loud, every light too harsh. By the end of the run, her team's score was the lowest of the day. 28 seconds slower than the next group. A death sentence for her career. Hayes tore off his gloves, slammed his rifle against the wall. She's done, he said. I want her off my team before someone gets hurt. He didn't even wait for Rains to respond. He just turned and walked off, his boots spitting gravel. Sarah stood alone in the clearing smoke. The evaluator marked something on a clipboard. Simulation failed, he said flatly. She nodded once, silent, then cleared her weapon. No excuses, no argument. Later, as she passed the admin building, she overheard two clerks through an open door. Her discharge papers, already halfway processed, one said. Med evals complete. Shame, really. You can tell she used to be something. Used to be. The words hit harder than any insult. She kept walking. That evening, the sky burned orange over the shooting range. Sarah sat on the low concrete wall overlooking the field, the wind tugging at her sleeve. Her fingers traced the edge of the scar under her shoulder, a raised reminder of the last mission she'd sworn never to talk about. She remembered the sound of that final shot, the silence that followed, and the order that had ended everything. She promised herself never to cross that line again. Never unless someone gave her reason to. Campbell. She turned. Chief Rains stood behind her, hands tucked behind his back, face unreadable. Evening, Chief. Evening, Sergeant. He studied her for a moment. You heard about the paperwork. She nodded. I heard. You want to tell me why you're holding back? Her eyes met his steady, unflinching. Would it change anything if I did? He shook his head slowly. Maybe not for you, but maybe for me. A faint, tired smile touched her lips. Some things, Chief, they stay locked until someone says something different. He didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet, but something in her tone made him pause. That night, he wrote one line in his notebook. She's not failing, she's waiting. The next day dawned cold and metallic. Wind whipped across the motor yard, carrying the smell of oil and coffee. Sarah was the first on site, tightening her vest straps, her fingers quick and deliberate. Every detail of her gear told a story, tape covering noisy buckles, straps shortened for close quarters movement, magazines aligned diagonally for faster reload. The adjustments weren't standard issue. They were habits, old ones. From the catwalk, Rains watched. He'd seen soldiers prepare for training before, but not like this. This was ritual, the kind of preparation people carried from darker places. Down below, Lieutenant Hayes swaggered into view, helmet tilted back, grin already in place. Morning, Chief, he called. You sure we need her in my unit again? She's just ballast. Rains didn't look up from his clipboard. That's what the test is for, Lieutenant. His tone was calm, but the weight behind it made Hayes bristle. Sarah caught the exchange from the corner of her eye. She didn't react, didn't flinch. But somewhere inside, something heavy shifted, not anger, not fear, just inevitability. The formation assembled, boots on gravel, cold breath in the air. Move out. Hayes barked orders as they advanced through the mock urban course. Sarah's steps were quiet, balanced, too quiet. Her finger hovered over the trigger, ready but restrained. A pop-up target appeared. Her rifle followed, breath in, exhale, but she hesitated. Too late. Red light again. Got him at Campbell, Hayes shouted. I hesitated because you always hesitate, he snapped. "You don't belong here." The echo of his voice cut through the compound. Her jaw clenched, but her answer was calm. "I belong where I'm told to stand, sir." The words caught him off guard, not defiance, not sarcasm, just truth. By the end of the phase, the team was spent. Sweat, dust, frustration. The results were brutal. Failure again. That afternoon, Hayes filed a formal complaint, citing safety concerns and combat incompetence. Raines took the paperwork silently, folded it once, and tucked it into his jacket. He didn't forward it, not yet, because something about this didn't fit. Later he found Sarah again, sitting on the same wall, same quiet posture. The sun had begun to set, painting the field in amber light. "You ever serve with special operations?" he asked suddenly. Her head tilted slightly, a flicker of a smile crossing her lips. "I've only ever done what needed to be done, Master Chief." Behind her, the doors of the barracks creaked open. Hayes and his men stepped out, laughing about something they'd said at dinner. "Careful, Tors," Hayes said loudly. "If you talk too loud, the CIA might recruit you." Tors laughed. "Yeah, or she might. She looks like she's got clearance for lunch duty." The laughter rolled again, familiar, cutting. Sarah stood, calm, composed. "Permission to prepare for tomorrow's evaluation, sir," she said. Hayes waved her off, rolling his eyes. "Try not to shoot any imaginary targets on your way." She walked away without another word. Raines watched her disappear into the corridor, her shadow long and unbroken under the fluorescent lights. He stayed there motionless, replaying every detail, her reflexes, her precision, that tattoo he'd glimpsed once under her sleeve. A dagger over wings, black ink, understated, deliberate. Not vanity, history. He knew symbols like that, and the kind of units that used them. He wrote another line in his notebook. Equipment of a ghost, reflexes of one too. The day ended, but the unease didn't. By 1800 hours, the courtyard buzzed again. The recruits gathered around the water tank, swapping bets about tomorrow's final test. "Think we make it past Phase 2 before she tanks us?" Tors joked. "Phase 1, Peter said, "if she's in a good mood." Even Hayes laughed. "Show some respect, gentlemen, at least wait until the cameras roll." Raines walked past them, eyes forward. He didn't break stride, didn't speak, but his jaw tightened. He'd buried too many soldiers to find that kind of mockery funny. He stopped at the admin office. The clerk behind the counter looked up, already packing to go home. "Evening, Chief. What can I do for you?" "I need to check on a personnel file," he said. The clerk frowned, then glanced at a list on the desk. "Still pending, sir. Decision hinges on tomorrow's field test." "Of course it does," Raines said quietly. He smiled without warmth and turned to leave. Outside, the light had turned gold. The day was dying slow. Back in the training hall, Sarah stood alone again, helmet off, rifle cradled in her hands. Her breath misted in the cooling air. She ran the course one last time. No timer, no witnesses, no applause, just motion. Breathe, step, aim, fire. Every movement perfect. Every shot precise. Every hesitation gone. When she finished, she stood in the middle of the silent room, her weapon low, her pulse steady. "They think I'm afraid to fail," she whispered to herself. "But I'm afraid of what happens when I stop pretending." Outside, the night wind rose, rattling the flag against the pole. In the command office, her discharge file waited for a signature. And somewhere far down the base road, headlights appeared, a black SUV rolling toward the compound. Inside sat a man in navy khakis, with a silver trident at his collar. He was coming for her. And when he spoke, he would say two words that would wake the part of Sarah Campbell the army had tried to bury. The morning came cold and quiet, a kind of silence that felt like warning. Fort Arden stirred awake under a sky the color of steel. Wind snapped at the flags, carrying the smell of diesel and damp earth. The recruits gathered in the yard, helmets on, weapons slung, breath fogging in the cold air. No one spoke much. Even Hayes's usual bravado seemed tempered today. Because everyone knew, this was the final evaluation. Pass or fail. For some, a medal. For others, a file closed forever. Sarah Campbell stood at the edge of the formation. Her gear was already in place, tightened and silent. No loose straps, no dangling clips. Even the sound of her breathing was measured, steady, calm, detached. Across the yard, Chief Rains watched her from the catwalk above. Coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. He was still thinking about the line he'd written the night before. She's not failing. She's waiting. He didn't yet know what for. The low growl of an engine interrupted his thoughts. A black SUV rolled down the gravel road toward the training yard, sunlight glinting off the windshield. It stopped with a hiss of brakes, and for a moment nobody moved. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, clean, calm in a way that carried command without trying. His uniform was navy khaki, the silver trident of the SEALs gleaming against the morning light. "Commander on deck," someone called instinctively. All movement froze, even Hayes straightened. The man's name was Commander Ryan Maddox, a name spoken quietly in the halls of those who'd seen real combat. There was something about him that silenced a crowd without raising his voice. He scanned the formation once, his gaze landing briefly on Sarah. She didn't move, didn't flinch, but something, a flicker behind her eyes, shifted. Maddox turned to Rains. "Permission to observe your final evaluation, Chief." Rains nodded. "Your call, sir." Hayes glanced at his men, confused but intrigued. "Who the hell brings a SEAL commander to a research test?" Torres whispered. "Maybe he's here to collect her gear," Hayes murmured back. Maddox ignored them. He walked toward the command tower, took the clipboard from Rains and flipped it open. His eyes lingered on Sarah's file. "You don't mind if I modify the scenario slightly," he said quietly. Rains met his gaze. There was weight behind it, something unsaid, something old. "Your operation, Commander." Maddox gave a small nod. "Then let's begin." The team lined up outside the training compound, a mock city of concrete walls and plywood doors. The exercise was simple on paper. Simulated hostage rescue, 6 rooms, multiple targets, limited time. Rain stood on the tower with the clipboard. Maddox beside him, arms crossed. Hayes stood below, barking final orders, his voice echoing across the yard. "Stay sharp, move fast, no hesitation." Sarah stood at the rear, rifle low, eyes on the building. To anyone watching, she looked the same as always, calm, expressionless, distant. But inside, something stirred, a pulse she hadn't felt in years. She tried to quiet it, tried to breathe it away. But then Maddox spoke. His voice came over the loudspeaker, calm, even. "Team 2, stand by." A pause. Then 2 words. "Ghost knife." The effect was instant. Sarah's shoulders tightened, not in fear but in recognition. Her breathing slowed, her stance shifted, her pulse synced to something deeper. She rolled her neck once, exhaled, and the air around her seemed to change. To anyone else, it was invisible. To Rains, it was unmistakable. He just watched a switch flip. The buzzer sounded, the doors blew open. "Move, move, move," Hayes shouted. They stormed in, chaos and noise, boots pounding, shouts bouncing off the concrete. Torres hit the first target, Peters took the second. Sarah followed, eyes locked ahead, her weapon steady, movement smooth. The first pop-up target appeared. Her rifle snapped up, not jerky, not desperate, just fluid. Bang! Center mass. Before the shell hit the ground, she'd already turned, moving to cover. Another target, bang, bang. 2 clean shots. No wasted motion. Rains leaned forward on the catwalk, eyes narrowing. He'd never seen anything like it. She wasn't reacting, she was predicting. Every door, every corner, every angle, she moved through them as if she already knew where the threats would appear. Hayes shouted commands, but she didn't need them. She was already ahead of him. Jesus, Torres muttered, lowering his rifle for a second. What the hell? Eyes up, Hayes barked, but even his voice had lost its edge. Sarah moved like a shadow between flashes of light. Low, efficient, silent. Room 1 cleared in 9 seconds. Room 2, 6. Room 3, 12. By the time they reached Room 4, even the observers along the fence had fallen silent. No one laughed now. The air filled only with the rhythm of her shots, 2 at a time, precise and controlled. The recoil was minimal, the aim perfect. She flowed through the course like a current of calm destruction. When her primary ran dry, the pistol came out smooth, seamless. Bang, bang, reload. Bang. The timer above the compound ticked relentlessly, but she seemed untouched by it, every motion economical, every breath a calculation. From the tower, Rains finally whispered, "My God." Maddox didn't answer. His gaze stayed on her, expression unreadable. At the final doorway, the lights cut out. The system switched to low-light mode, a test of instinct. Sarah didn't pause. She reached up, switched off her weapon light, and advanced by the faint reflection of the emergency glow strips on the floor. Every step was silent. Every shot precise. 10 minutes after the buzzer began, it ended, the siren blaring 3 long notes across the field. Mission complete. The scoreboard above the tower flashed red, then green. No casualties. Time 10 minutes 3 seconds. The previous record, 28 minutes, had stood for 5 years. The silence that followed felt heavier than applause. Sarah lowered her rifle, flicked the safety on, and exhaled once. "Target secured," she said simply. No one moved. Even Hayes stood frozen, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. Down on the field, a few recruits whispered. 10 minutes. That's impossible. Rains glanced at Maddox. What just happened? Maddox's eyes didn't leave Sarah. She did exactly what she was trained to do, he said quietly. Rains frowned. And what's that? Maddox turned slightly, his voice low enough that only the chief could hear. Be better than the rest of us combined. The tension broke when Maddox clapped once, slow, deliberate. It echoed like a gunshot. That's enough, he said, more than enough. Rains realized his hand was trembling slightly around the clipboard. He hadn't noticed until now that he'd been holding his breath the whole time. Down below, Sarah stood still, eyes on Maddox. She didn't salute, didn't smile, just waited. Chief, Maddox said, still watching her, you know her record. Rains nodded. 3 deployments, 1 injury, administrative rotation. Not quite, Maddox said. She served under my command, Ghost Knife Unit, deep reconnaissance, 0 visibility, no reinforcements, no extraction. Rains blinked. Ghost Knife, that's a rumor. Was, Maddox corrected, until now. Hayes swallowed hard. Wait, she was one of them. Maddox turned to him slowly. She was the best of them. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. She never failed a mission, Maddox continued. 3 years, no losses, every target secured, every operator brought home. When she was injured, she refused reassignment. We placed her under medical rotation and eventually observation. Observation, Rains asked carefully. Maddox nodded. Ghost Knife operatives are conditioned, trained to suppress combat response when not deployed. It prevents reflexive engagement in civilian environments. So all this time, Rains began. She wasn't failing, Maddox finished. She was blocked, waiting for activation. Rains looked down at the field at Sarah, standing quietly amid the smoke and silence. The soldier everyone called broken, the woman they'd laughed at. She hadn't been failing the test. The test had been failing her. Maddox's voice carried across the compound now, calm, commanding. Staff Sergeant Campbell served under my direct command. She's not here because she's unfit. She's here because we needed to know if the best of us could still breathe like the rest of us. Hayes's jaw tightened. His earlier pride melted into something closer to shame. I didn't know, sir. Now you do, Maddox said. Consider yourself educated. Rains looked back at Sarah, her rifle now slung, her face unreadable. Ma'am, Hayes said finally, his voice cracking a little, why didn't you just tell us? Sarah's reply was quiet, almost kind. Because I wasn't authorized to. Her words fell like a blade between them. Behind her the scoreboard still glowed. 10-03, no casualties. Maddox stepped forward, his tone softening. When I decommissioned the unit, I told you something, Sergeant. Do you remember? Sarah nodded once. That some missions don't end when you come home. Maddox smiled faintly. And you haven't forgotten. She shook her head. I tried, but some things stay quiet, they don't disappear. The field was still. Even the recruits who'd mocked her earlier stood with lowered eyes. Chief Rains closed his notebook slowly, his throat tight. She let them think she was broken, he murmured. 2 weeks of humiliation, all because she was ordered not to act. Maddox's gaze didn't leave her. Disciplined chief, the kind the rest of us pray to find. He turned to the assembled recruits. You all saw what happened when I spoke 2 words. That wasn't luck. That wasn't adrenaline. That was control, the kind that's earned in silence and paid for in scars. Rain's voice dropped. She just broke a record that took a SEAL team to set. Maddox smiled faintly, and she wasn't even trying. The recruit stood motionless, humbled, awed, small. No one laughed now. No one dared. Sarah exhaled softly, holstered her weapon, and stood in the doorway of the kill house. The sunlight broke through the clouds and hit her shoulder, the scar catching the light like silver thread. Permission to stand down, sir, she said quietly. Maddox nodded once. Granted, ghost knife. The old call sign hung in the air like a benediction. And for the first time in years, she let herself breathe freely. The flag above the yard rippled once in the wind, as if saluting back. And around her, Fort Arden stood in silence, no whispers, no laughter, only the quiet awe of soldiers who had just learned that sometimes the loudest act of strength is restraint. For a long time, no one moved. The echo of Commander Maddox's last words still hung in the air like smoke. Welcome home, ghost knife. Every soldier on the range stood frozen. Some out of disbelief, some out of shame, but mostly out of awe. They had seen what she'd done, how the woman they'd mocked, doubted, dismissed, had turned into something unstoppable, how she had cut through the course like memory itself. Now standing in the open sunlight, rifle slung and posture calm, Staff Sergeant Sarah Campbell looked exactly as she had before, silent, still, unmoved. And yet everything had changed. The flag above Fort Arden stirred in the wind. Boots shifted, a cough broke the silence. Then slowly, every gaze turned toward her. Lieutenant Hayes was the first to step forward. His face, usually so sure, was pale now, stripped of arrogance. Ma'am, he hesitated, the word strange in his mouth. Why didn't you tell us? Sarah's eyes found his. There was no anger there, only a kind of tired understanding. Because authorization isn't the same as permission, she said softly, and some things lose meaning when you try to explain them. Hayes looked down. He nodded once slowly. I understand now. No, she replied gently, you will someday. Behind them, Chief Rains descended from the tower, clipboard tucked under his arm. His boots crunched over the gravel, the only sound in a field otherwise held hostage by reverence. When he reached Maddox, the two men exchanged a look, an entire conversation without words. Rains finally spoke. "I've been in this business 30 years, Commander. I've seen men freeze, break, fight, die, but I've never seen control like that." Maddox's eyes stayed on Sarah. "That's because you've never seen someone fight their own instinct that long just to keep others safe from it." Rains frowned. She was suppressing herself. "Every second," Maddox said. "Every failed drill, every hesitation. Her brain was overriding years of conditioning." Rains exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "They called her weak." "They called her disciplined," Maddox corrected quietly. "They just didn't understand what kind of discipline it takes to hold back a trained predator." The words landed heavy. Rains looked back toward Sarah, still standing in that quiet center of calm, like the eye of a storm that had finally stilled. When the order to dismiss was given, nobody moved right away. Not because they hadn't heard, but because no one knew how to move after something like that. Eventually, Hayes stepped forward again, helmet tucked under his arm, shoulders squared not out of pride but apology. "Staff Sergeant," he began, the title caught in his throat. "For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry, we all are." Sarah studied him for a moment, the way a medic studies a wound, not out of judgment but assessment. "You don't owe me an apology, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "You saw what you were meant to see. That's how conditioning works on both sides." He swallowed hard. "Still, I was wrong." She tilted her head, almost smiling. "Good, that means you're learning." Torres and Peters, who had once mocked her most, stood behind Hayes now, silent, humbled. Torres removed his helmet, rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, I don't even have words." "You don't need them," she replied. "Just do better than you did yesterday. That's all the words that matter." The simplicity of it disarmed them. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was clean, like air after rain. Chief Rains stepped between them, voice calm but carrying authority. "Company," he said quietly, "attention." The entire formation straightened. Boots slammed the ground in unison. Even Maddox turned, giving the chief a respectful nod. Rains took a slow breath, then barked, "Render honors." The command rippled through the formation like thunder. Dozens of right hands rose, palms cutting the air, stopping sharp at brows and visors. Every soldier saluted her. A staff sergeant, saluted by an entire company. Even Maddox raised his hand, his gesture slow and deliberate, not as a superior, but as a peer. Sarah blinked once, caught off guard. For a heartbeat, her instinct was to step back, to deflect, to disappear. But something in Maddox's expression stopped her. She stood tall, shoulders back, and returned the salute. It wasn't pride. It wasn't victory. It was acknowledgement, a quiet truce between who she had been and who she had become. When the field finally cleared, the base was still humming with aftershock. Stories spread faster than the morning sun, about the woman who had broken the SEAL record, about the words that had unlocked her, about the commander who saluted down the chain of command. By noon, everyone at Fort Arden had heard her name. Some said she was part of a classified unit, others said she was a myth. Sarah didn't correct any of them. She sat alone in the shade of the hangar, her rifle stripped and cleaned beside her, the metallic scent of oil lingering in the air. Her hands moved automatically, disassemble, inspect, reassemble, but her mind was far away. Rains approached quietly, 2 paper cups of coffee in hand. He placed one beside her and sat down on the bench without a word. "Black," he said, "the only way it's meant to be." She smiled faintly. "You read my file." He chuckled, "Didn't have to." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunlight shift across the concrete. Finally, Rain spoke. I read your medical reports. They said your reflexes were overactive, too sharp for normal life. Sarah nodded slowly. That's one way to say it. How'd you live with that? She turned the cup in her hands, eyes fixed on the rippling surface of the coffee. I buried it. He studied her profile, calm, steady, but fragile in its own way. Commander Maddox, Rain said carefully. He seemed proud, but also sad. Sarah's gaze softened. He trained us. Ghost Knife wasn't built for glory. We were made to disappear before wars began. No recognition, no records, no return. Rains nodded slowly. And now? Now I'm here. She looked out toward the field, teaching kids who think discipline ends when the noise stops. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's exactly why you're supposed to be here. She took a sip, the coffee bitter but grounding. Maybe. That afternoon, Commander Maddox found her near the observation deck, staring out over the empty range. Beautiful day to break every record I've ever seen, he said quietly. She didn't turn. It's just another day, sir. No, he said, not for them. You reminded them what control looks like. She finally looked at him, her eyes catching the light. And what does it look like to you? He smiled, faint and tired, like home. There was a pause, the kind that carried years inside it. When I gave you that word, he said, I wasn't sure what would happen. Some never come back from deactivation. But you didn't just come back. You taught them what strength really means. Sarah's voice was soft, almost breaking. It didn't feel like strength. What did it feel like? Relief, she said. Like I could finally breathe again, even if just for 10 minutes. Maddox nodded. 10 minutes was enough. He handed her a sealed envelope. She recognized the seal, official, embossed, heavy. Your new assignment, he said, effective immediately. She opened it. Advanced Tactical Instructor, Fort Arden Combat Division. Signed, Commander Ryan Maddox. Her eyes lifted. You never ask before you order, do you? He grinned faintly. Never did, never will. She folded the paper neatly. Then I'll follow the order. Maddox looked at her for a long moment. You know, he said softly, some warriors are built to win battles. Others are built to stop wars before they start. You were always the latter. Her gaze drifted to the field, where the golden light of evening began to stretch across the concrete. Maybe, she said quietly, but every war leaves echoes, some louder than others. Maddox's tone softened even more, and some quieter, but they last longer. He turned to leave, pausing after a few steps. Welcome home, Sergeant. She didn't answer, but her eyes followed him until the SUV disappeared down the gravel road. As the sun lowered, painting the sky in burnt gold and violet, Sarah sat alone again on the bleachers overlooking the field, her rifle disassembled beside her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single brass casing, one she'd picked up from the ground after the exercise. It glinted in the fading light like a tiny sun. She rolled it between her fingers, feeling its weight light, almost nothing. Yet it carried everything. The laughter, the doubt, the restraint, the silence. Every second she'd swallowed for years. Rain's voice came from behind her. You kept a souvenir. She smiled faintly, something to remind me that control has a sound. He sat beside her, offering another cup of that bitter black coffee. Base Command already knows, he said. Your record, your time, the commander's salute, it'll be in the reports before midnight. Let them write what they want, she murmured. I'm not here for the story. He nodded. Then what are you here for? She watched the last rays of sunlight skim over the metal targets below. For peace, she said simply, and maybe to teach them that silence isn't weakness. Rains leaned back, following her gaze. You'll make a hell of an instructor. She smiled, small, real. Then maybe I'll finally get to teach them something worth surviving for. The sky deepened into twilight. The training field lay quiet, the scars of the day already fading into shadow. And in that stillness, her mind replayed Maddox's words, the same ones that had awakened her from dormancy. Ghost knife, stand by. Only now they meant something else. They weren't activation words anymore. They were acknowledgement, a reminder that she was still seen, still alive, still capable of purpose without violence. As night fell over Fort Arden, the last light glinted off that brass casing in her hand, and the narrator's voice would fade in. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits quiet, patient, unseen, until the world finally remembers what dignity looks like. It was strange, the silence of mornings after change. The kind that feels heavier than the day before, as if the air itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next. Fort Arden woke slowly that morning. Engines coughed to life. Boots scraped against gravel. The metallic rhythm of discipline returned to the base, as steady and cold as the wind that swept through the flagpoles. But there was something different in the air now. Whispers carried softer this time. No laughter, no mockery, just the kind of respect that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. At the far end of the training yard, Staff Sergeant Sarah Campbell stood with a clipboard in hand. The same woman who'd been ridiculed 2 weeks ago now stood at the head of a formation. Her uniform was simple, clean. No medals on display, no patches that hinted at the classified history she carried. But everyone knew. The name Ghost Knife had spread through the base like rumor turned scripture. For once, even the new recruit stood straighter when she passed. She didn't shout, she didn't posture. She simply was. Morning drills start in 2 minutes, she said evenly, voice calm but firm. No delays, no excuses. If you're late, you run until the sun gets bored. A ripple of chuckles moved through the group, light, nervous, respectful. It was the first time she'd seen them laugh without cruelty. And that was something. Chief Rain stood a few paces back, arms folded, watching the formation with quiet satisfaction. She doesn't even need to raise her voice, he muttered to the corporal beside him. That's what command looks like when it earns itself. The corporal nodded. They fear her. Rain smiled faintly. No, they believe her. By 600, the recruits were already sweating. Sarah moved between them like a ghost, calm, observant, offering short corrections without breaking stride. Lower your shoulder, you're showing your center line. Don't watch the trigger, feel it. Stop holding your breath before the shot, that's how you die slow. Each sentence was precise, spoken in the tone of someone who'd learned through blood and repetition. The young recruits, some barely 20, hung on her every word. Among them was Private Elena Ruiz, the only woman in the new cycle. Small, wiry, fierce-eyed. Sarah saw herself in her immediately. Elena struggled with the same things Sarah once did, the balance between discipline and instinct, between strength and fear. And like Sarah once had, she was being underestimated. During a rest break, Tors, now assigned to assist Sarah's training squad, dropped beside her. Sweat clung to his temples, but his grin was genuine. "You've turned the whole base upside down," he said. Sarah didn't look up from her notebook, didn't mean to. "Yeah, but you did. Hayes even volunteered for night watch duty just to reflect. That's a miracle." She smirked. Maybe humility's contagious. He laughed. "I'll catch it if I can." Then his tone softened. "You know, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. You make people better." Sarah paused, closing the notebook. "That's the job, Tors. Not to make them tougher, just better." That afternoon, the wind picked up, carrying dust through the open range. Sarah set up the marksmanship line for evaluation. Her recruits spaced out, rifles lined like instruments before a performance. Elena Ruiz took position at lane 5. Her hands trembled just slightly. Sarah watched. She recognized that tremor not from fear but from memory, from a mind still arguing with itself. "Private Ruiz," she said, stepping closer, "what's your breathing pattern?" Elena hesitated, "Too short, one long." Sarah nodded. "Good, keep it, just stop fighting the wind." Elena frowned. "Ma'am." Sarah knelt beside her, pointing toward the flag fluttering downrange. "The wind's not your enemy, it's your signal. Use it. Let it tell you when to move." Elena nodded slowly, adjusting her aim. "Again," Sarah said quietly. Elena took a breath, exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the range, sharp, clean. The target's red light blinked. Bullseye. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Sarah stood, brushing dust from her knee. "Better," she said. "Now do it again until it stops being luck." Rains, watching from behind the glass of the control tower, couldn't help but smile. He turned to Maddox, who had reappeared that morning to oversee her new role. "She's good with them," Rains said. "She always was," Maddox replied, "even when she didn't speak." Rains chuckled. "Now she's teaching others to listen to silence." "That's leadership," Maddox said simply. By sunset, the last of the trainees had cleared the field. The wind had died down, the flag hung still. Sarah sat on the low concrete wall again, her spot. This time she wasn't alone. Elena approached, hesitating before sitting beside her. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Sarah nodded. Elena looked out over the range, eyes thoughtful. "They said you used to be special operations." Sarah smirked faintly. "People say a lot of things." "Is it true?" After a pause, Sarah answered softly, "It was true once." Elena studied her for a moment. "Did you ever mess up?" Sarah laughed under her breath. "Every day." "But you're perfect out there," Elena said quietly. Sarah turned to her, voice steady. "No one is, not even when it looks that way. Perfection's a story people tell when they forget how much it costs." Elena frowned slightly. "So what's it cost?" Sarah's gaze drifted to the range, the same space that once humiliated her. "Everything you're willing to lose, and one thing you never expected to." Elena nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but listening with the kind of focus that meant someday she would. Sarah glanced at her rifle, lying beside the bench. "You want to know what real strength is?" she asked. Elena nodded again. "Strength," Sarah said softly, "is staying calm long enough to give others the chance to believe they can be too." The younger woman absorbed that in silence. No bravado, no speeches, just the wind returning, whispering through the training field like a voice that approved. Later that night, Sarah walked past the barracks. The laughter she heard now wasn't sharp or cruel, it was alive, human. The sound of soldiers learning to be a team. She paused by the door to the rec room. Inside, Hayes sat at a table, surrounded by his men. They were in the middle of a story Torres acting out a dramatic slow-motion fall that had everyone doubled over. When Hayes spotted her, he stood immediately. "Sergeant," he said, respectful. Sarah raised a hand. "At ease, Lieutenant, I'm just passing through." But Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "For what it's worth, you changed the whole place. They train harder, they listen, even me." She smiled slightly. "That's dangerous, a lieutenant who listens." He laughed softly. "Don't get used to it." Then his tone shifted, serious. "I mean it though, you made us better, I owe you that." Sarah nodded once. "No debts here, Lieutenant, just lessons." As she turned to leave, he called out, "Those two words, what do they mean exactly?" She paused at the door, not looking back. "They're a reminder," she said quietly, "that sometimes you need someone to tell you it's okay to be who you were made to be." Then she stepped out into the night, the cold air washing over her face like absolution. Chief Rains found her later by the range, where floodlights glowed pale over empty targets. "You don't sleep much, do you?" he said. "Not when there's peace to listen to," she replied. He leaned against the railing beside her. "You ever think about leaving again, taking command somewhere else?" She shook her head slowly. "I think I've had enough command for one life. I just want to teach." Rain studied her face, the calm, the composure, the faint trace of fatigue that never quite left her. "You know," he said, "for a woman who doesn't talk much, you've said more to this base in 2 weeks than any officer in 10 years. She smiled faintly. "Words aren't the only way to speak, Chief." He nodded. "You sound like a philosopher." "Maybe just someone who's tired of noise," she said. As the night deepened, the sound of distant gunfire echoed from the next range, another team running late-night drills. The rhythm of it, the pattern of shots, the pauses, made her think of something she hadn't in years. Her old unit. Ghost Knife. Faces flashed in memory: Daniels, Worth, and Lee, the ones who didn't make it home. Their laughter, their silence, the way they'd vanished without ceremony, names erased to protect missions that no longer existed. She stood there for a long moment, eyes glinting in the dim light, the wind tugging at her sleeves. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the mission never ends, it just changes shape." Behind her, the floodlight flickered, brief, fleeting. The base was quiet again. And in that quiet, she finally understood something Maddox had once told her long ago. There's more courage in rebuilding than in fighting. Anyone can destroy, but it takes a soldier to heal. She breathed in the night air, the smell of dust and cordite and rain, the scent of home for someone who never thought she'd have one again. Tomorrow would come, another drill, another sunrise, another lesson to teach. But for now there was peace. The camera would fade out slowly, her silhouette framed against the training field, voiceover soft, reflective, carrying the moral heart of the episode. You don't have to shout to be strong. Sometimes strength is quiet. It listens, it endures, and it teaches others how to do the same. The storm rolled in without warning. A low growl across the horizon, dark clouds swallowing the early morning light. By the time the first thunder cracked, Fort Arden was already alive with movement, soldiers running, sirens whining low, radios buzzing in clipped urgency. At first, Sarah thought it was another drill. But the tension in Rain's voice told her otherwise. "Get your gear," he said, striding into the instructor's office. "This isn't training." She stood calm but alert. "What happened?" "Convoy ambush," he said. 2 clicks outside the perimeter. Non-combat transport, medical supplies, local aid. Casualties? Unknown. Comms went dark after the first distress signal. Sarah's eyes sharpened. "You're saying they hit humanitarian cargo?" Rains nodded grimly. "And they're still out there." Within minutes, the base was in controlled chaos. Squads assembling, radios crackling, boots hitting concrete in a rhythm that no longer felt like training. Sarah moved through it with silent precision, gear in hand, vest strapped tight. Technically, she wasn't combat personnel anymore. Her orders were clear: instruct, observe, advise. But some instincts don't vanish when you hang up your rifle. Rains caught her at the armory door. "Before you say it, no, you're not cleared to deploy." She met his eyes, steady, quiet. "You need me out there." "I need you here," he shot back. "Command sending a quick response team. Let the young ones handle it." Her gaze flicked past him to the recruits loading into Humvees, faces pale with adrenaline and uncertainty. Among them, Private Elena Ruiz. Sarah's voice dropped, calm but heavy. "They're not ready." Rains didn't argue, but he didn't move either. "Then teach them from here," he said finally. But the tone in his voice wasn't conviction. It was fear, the kind that comes from knowing she was right. The convoy rolled out through the base gates, engines rumbling into the gray morning. Mud splattered under the tires, rain starting to fall in sheets. Sarah stood under the overhang, watching them vanish into the storm. Elena had been in the lead truck. "Chief," she said, not turning, "get me a radio channel to command." Rain sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Campbell." "Now." Something in her tone, soft but absolute, made him obey without another word. She pressed the headset against her ear, listening. Static. Then a faint voice cutting through the interference. "Under fire, 3 o'clock, we've got 2 down." The transmission dissolved into static, then silence. Rain's expression hardened. "That's Ruiz's unit." Sarah was already moving. "Patch me through to the transport bay." "Sarah." "Do it, Chief." Her voice was quiet, but it carried authority, the kind that reminded him she wasn't just an instructor. She was Ghost Knife. He hesitated, then keyed the radio. "Transport bay, this is command. Prep vehicle Bravo for immediate deployment. Copy." "Copy." Sarah grabbed her helmet from the rack. Rain stepped in front of her. "You walk out that gate, it's my career." She looked him dead in the eye. "Then I'll bring it back with me." The Humvee growled through the mud, windshield wipers struggling against the storm. Visibility near zero. Radio chatter chaotic. Sarah sat behind the wheel, focus locked, hands calm on the steering wheel. Every instinct in her body hummed, that old hum she'd tried to silence for years. She drove fast, precise, never overcorrecting. The road twisted through the valley, a choke point perfect for an ambush. 2 minutes later, smoke rose ahead, thin at first, then thicker. When she crested the ridge, the scene unfolded like a memory she didn't want. Trucks burning, mud churned by boots and tires, sporadic gunfire echoing through the storm. "Damn it," she muttered, slamming the gearshift into park. She grabbed her rifle, checked the chamber, and slid out into the rain. The smell of diesel and cordite hit her at once. She moved low, fast, silent, not rushing, not hesitating. Every motion automatic, every angle pre-calculated. She reached the first overturned truck. 2 soldiers crouched behind it, one clutching a bleeding arm. "Status," she called, keeping her voice low but firm. The unwounded soldier turned, eyes wide. Who are you?" "Base instructor," she said. "Where's your co?" "Down," he stammered. "We're pinned by fire from the tree line." Sarah peered through the rain. Muzzle flashes flickered from the dense brush ahead, too disciplined for random raiders. This wasn't a coincidence. "Keep pressure on his arm," she ordered. "Don't move until I say." Then she slipped around the truck, vanished into the rain. Chief Rain's voice crackled faintly through her earpiece. "Sarah, command says backup still 10 minutes out. You need to stay put." She crouched behind a rock, scanning the field through the scope. 10 minutes is too long. Then wait for air support." "Negative," she said. "They'll lose everyone before that." Her eyes found movement, 2 figures advancing through the brush, flanking the wrecks. She adjusted the windage dial, took a breath. Rain hit her face, cold and sharp. 1 squeeze. 2. Both targets dropped clean, silent. "Shots fired," Rain said sharply. "That you?" "Affirmative, 2 hostiles down, advancing." "Campbell." But the line cut off, interference swallowing his voice. Sarah was already moving again. She circled wide, using the terrain to her advantage, an old habit from another life. The mud was thick, sucking at her boots. The rain turned the world into a blur of gray and motion. Ahead, another truck, doors open, rounds punched through the frame. Inside, a voice, weak, trembling. "Elena." A pause, then faintly, "Ma'am." Sarah's chest tightened. "Hold position, I'm coming." She crawled through the mud, staying low. Another volley cracked overhead, rounds chewing into the metal inches from her hand. She waited, counted 3 seconds between bursts. On the fourth, she moved, sprinted, slid behind the truck, and yanked the door open. Elena lay inside, her face streaked with mud and blood, her rifle empty, her eyes wide. "I couldn't get to him," she whispered. "He's hit." Sarah scanned the cab, the driver motionless, gone. "Then we move," Sarah said. "You with me?" Elena nodded shakily. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah handed her a fresh mag. "Reload, stay low, don't fire unless I say." They moved together, crawling out the far side of the truck, slipping into the trees. Rain hammered the leaves, visibility barely 5 meters. But Sarah didn't need sight. She listened, the faint rhythm of boots, the metallic click of a weapon's safety, the breath of someone too confident. She motioned to Elena, one hand signal. "Flank left." Elena nodded, copying her movements with silent precision. 2 shapes appeared through the foliage. Sarah waited, counted heartbeats. Then, bang, bang, both fell. The silence afterward was heavier than thunder. By the time Rain's voice returned through the static, it was almost calm again. "Sarah, talk to me." She exhaled, sight secure, 4 hostiles neutralized, survivors extracted. "You're out of your mind," he said, voice breaking between relief and anger. "You disobeyed direct orders." She smiled faintly, wiping mud from her face. "I followed the one that mattered." He didn't respond for a while, then quietly, "You're bringing them home." "Always," she said. When the Humvees finally rolled back through the gates of Fort Arden, the rain had stopped. The recruits stared as the vehicles approached, mud-caked, dented but moving. Sarah climbed down first. Elena followed, bandaged arm but alive. Chief Rains was waiting at the gate. He didn't speak as she approached. He just looked at her, searching for words that didn't exist. Finally, he sighed. "Commander Maddox is going to have a heart attack when he reads the report." Sarah shrugged. "Then we'll both get demoted together." Rains chuckled despite himself. "You know, for someone who hates attention, you attract a hell of a lot of it." She smiled. "Not my intention." "Never is," he said. "But somehow you keep saving people anyway." Later that night, she sat outside the barracks with Elena, both wrapped in blankets, the smell of wet earth still heavy in the air. Elena stared at the ground. "I thought I was going to die out there." Sarah didn't answer at first, then softly, "You didn't." "Because of you." "No," Sarah said, "because you listened." Elena looked up, eyes wide. "You followed my hand's signal," Sarah continued. "You didn't freeze, you trusted the quiet, that's why you're alive." Elena nodded slowly, emotion catching in her throat. "Ma'am," she whispered, "how do you stay calm when everything's falling apart?" Sarah looked out toward the dark horizon, where lightning still flickered faintly in the distance. "You remember what peace feels like," she said, "and then you fight to keep it." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of generators and the wind pushing against the flag above the compound. Finally, Elena spoke again. "Do you think it ever gets easier?" Sarah smiled faintly. "No, but it gets clearer." When the report reached Commander Maddox the next morning, his reaction was predictable, a long sigh, followed by a quiet smile. He called Rains. "Tell Campbell she's insubordinate as ever." Rains grinned. "Should I put that in writing?" "Just tell her one thing," Maddox said. "Those 2 words still stand." Rains frowned. "You mean?" "Yes," Maddox said. "Ghost knife, stand by." He paused, then added softly, "And this time not for war but for whoever needs her next." As the sun rose over Fort Arden, the field lay quiet again. No alarms, no gunfire, just the hum of morning. Sarah stood by the railing, coffee in hand, watching the flag flutter against the dawn. She wasn't thinking about medals or glory or orders. She was thinking about Elena, about Rains, about the silence between chaos, the kind she'd learned to live in. And for the first time, she smiled, not the smile of a survivor, but of someone who had finally learned what her strength was for. The narrator's voice would close softly, over the golden light spilling across the base. Some soldiers fight because they have to. Others fight because they can. But the rarest ones, they fight only when silence needs defending. The commendation came faster than the reprimand. 2 days after the ambush, Fort Arden was dressed in ceremony. Flags raised, uniforms pressed, the smell of starch and gun oil mixed with the crisp bite of autumn air. Sarah Campbell stood at the edge of the parade ground, helmet tucked under her arm, expression unreadable. A line of recruits stood beside her, including Private Elena Ruiz, her left arm still bandaged. They looked proud, nervous, and far too young to understand how close they'd come to being names on a report. Across the platform, Commander Maddox stepped up to the microphone. His khakis were spotless, his expression calm, though his eyes carried that familiar fatigue of men who'd buried too many stories under medals. He didn't start with protocol, he never did. He started with silence, a long one. Then, Fort Arden was built to train soldiers, not heroes, but sometimes the two meet halfway. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. 2 days ago, he continued, a humanitarian convoy came under attack. Communication was lost. Response time was projected at 10 minutes. He looked directly at Sarah. It took 5. Whispers, a few heads turned. She wasn't ordered to go, Maddox said, but she went anyway, not for glory, not for orders for them. He gestured toward the young recruits beside her. And because of that, there are 6 soldiers alive who wouldn't be. The wind tugged at the flags. Somewhere a camera clicked. He turned back to Sarah. Staff Sergeant Campbell, you've been reprimanded twice in your career for disobeying orders. A beat of tension passed through the formation. Maddox's voice softened. And every time it saved lives. He stepped down from the platform, holding a small silver pin, the cross of quiet valor, rarely awarded, almost never publicly. This isn't for combat, he said. It's for restraint, for leadership when chaos begged you to lose control. He pinned it on her uniform himself. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then honest. Even Rains clapped, Torres hazed Elena. Everyone who'd once doubted her. Sarah stood still through it all, eyes on the horizon. Because medals never mattered. Only meaning did. Later, when the field emptied and the banners came down, Maddox found her outside the hangar, hands clasped behind her back, looking at the sky as though trying to read something written beyond the clouds. You should have told me before you rolled out, he said. She didn't turn. You would have stopped me. Yes, he said quietly, I would have. They stood in silence. The hum of generators filled the distance. You ever wonder, she said finally, why peace feels heavier than war? Maddox smiled faintly. Because peace demands that we face what war allowed us to forget. She nodded slowly, and what's that? Our own reflection. For a moment, they both just watched the sky. Then he handed her an envelope, sealed, crisp government paper. Command's sending me to the capital, he said. They want a full debrief. They'll want one from you too. She took the envelope, tucking it into her pocket. And what are they expecting to hear? The truth, he said, or at least the part of it that fits on record. She gave a small laugh. Then they'll get a very short report. He smiled, as always. Then his tone shifted, softer, heavier. They're offering you a transfer, training command. DC, you'd run the whole program, shape recruits nationwide. It's a good position, Sarah. Safer, bigger reach. She didn't answer immediately. The wind carried the faint rattle of a loose flag chain. Finally, she said, and what happens to the people here? They'll adapt. She turned to him fully now, gray eyes sharp. They just learn to believe in something. You can't teach that through a screen. Maddox studied her, then nodded once. Then tell them yourself. He left the choice in her hands, and she hated that, because choice was heavier than orders. That night, she sat alone in the dim glow of the barracks office. The envelope lay open on the desk. Inside, the transfer papers already signed by command, waiting only for her name. Her pen hovered above the line. She'd spent half her life following orders. Now, for once, she could choose her direction: peace, promotion, prestige. But across from her on the corkboard were pinned photos from the last 2 weeks. Trainees during drills, Elena smiling through exhaustion, Tors teaching others how to check wind drift, Rains laughing beside a field coffee pot. Pieces of something worth staying for. The pen lowered. She didn't sign. By morning, the decision was made. The recruits gathered at dawn for what they assumed was another routine exercise. The sky was pale gold, the ground damp from overnight rain. Sarah stood before them, calm, collected, the faint trace of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Command offered me a transfer," she began. A murmur rippled through the formation. Elena's head snapped up, her expression flickering between pride and panic. Sarah continued, "It's a good position, safer, fancier coffee." A few chuckles. She let them settle before speaking again. "But I'm not going." Silence. Because this base doesn't need another officer behind a desk. It needs people who remember what silence costs, and who know how to train others to protect it. Her gaze swept the line, landing on Elena, on Tors, on Hayes, on all of them. Every soldier here will face something someday that doesn't make sense, something that asks you to choose between survival and integrity. If you remember anything from me, remember this. The world doesn't need louder soldiers, it needs quieter ones. The kind who lead by how they stand, not what they shout. The field was utterly still. Even the flag stopped fluttering for a heartbeat. Then, as if on cue, Rain stepped forward. "You heard her," he barked. "Get to work. Strength isn't built in applause." The recruits scattered, laughing and shouting orders, their energy lighter now, freer. Sarah watched them go, arms folded loosely, a quiet pride settling in her chest. Rains lingered beside her. "So, you staying?" "Looks that way," she said. He smirked. "Good. The coffee here's bad, but the company's decent." She laughed. "You're not wrong." Days turned to weeks. Peace returned to Fort Arden, a fragile, functional peace that smelled of rain, sweat, and discipline. Under Sarah's guidance, the training evolved. She introduced silence drills, 15 minutes of total quiet after every session. At first, the recruits thought it strange. By the end of the month, they understood. Because in that silence, they learned to hear what mattered: breath, heartbeat, intuition. The same things she'd once buried to survive. Elena became one of her strongest shooters. Tors led squad formations with humility instead of ego. Even Hayes, once impatient and proud, started teaching patience before precision. Sarah watched all of it quietly, like a gardener who never needed to own the bloom. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elena found her again on the wall overlooking the range. "Ma'am," she said, sitting beside her, "I heard they gave you another medal. Why didn't you wear it today?" Sarah smiled. "Because medals shine too bright. They make it hard for others to see themselves." Elena tilted her head. "So what do you wear instead?" Sarah looked down at her hands, calloused, scarred, steady. "These," she said, "and the people I train." Elena nodded slowly, thoughtful. After a pause, she said, "You think the commander will ever stop calling you Ghost Knife?" Sarah chuckled. "No, but I think I've finally learned what it means." "What's that?" "That a knife isn't for pride," she said softly. "It's for precision. It cuts only what it must." Later that night, Rains found her in the hangar, cleaning the same rifle she'd used in the convoy. "You ever gonna rest Campbell?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe after I fix this trigger pull." He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were broken." She looked up. "You weren't the only one." He nodded. "Guess we both learned something." "What's that?" "That sometimes, what looks like breaking is just someone holding too much light." She stopped cleaning, her expression softening. "Careful, Chief, you're starting to sound poetic." He grinned. "Must be your bad influence." When the base lights dimmed and the night settled in, Sarah walked out to the training field one last time before lights out. The stars hung cold above. The air smelled faintly of cordite and pine. She stood where she'd once been humiliated, once called unfit, once forced to hold herself back. Now it was quiet. Her reflection glimmered faintly in a puddle at her boots, the faint outline of a soldier who had finally stopped fighting herself. She closed her eyes and breathed in the stillness. Somewhere deep inside, the echo of Maddox's voice lingered. "Ghost knife. Stand by." Only now, she understood it wasn't an order. It was permission. Permission to be still. To teach her. To live. And as the wind brushed across the field, carrying the faint rustle of flags and distant laughter from the barracks, the narrator's voice would fade in, low, steady, timeless. Service doesn't end when the battle's over. Sometimes it begins where silence starts. Because the bravest thing a soldier can do is learn to put down the weapon and keep holding the line. The days that followed felt lighter. Not easier, just lighter. Fort Arden returned to its rhythm, the kind that only soldiers understand. Drills at dawn, laughter at dusk, silence at night. The sound of boots on gravel, rifles clacking open and shut, voices calling cadence across the morning fog. But for Staff Sergeant Sarah Campbell, something had changed. Not around her, within her. She no longer carried the weight of what people thought she was. For years, she'd been a shadow moving through orders, existing between what she'd done and what she wasn't allowed to be. Now she moved with purpose, unhidden, unashamed. A soldier not defined by the battles she fought, but by the peace she chose. On a quiet Tuesday morning, she found herself walking the perimeter trail alone. The grass was still wet with dew. The horizon shimmered in the distance, that faint gold line where night surrenders to morning. She stopped by the old watchtower, running her fingers across the rusted railing. From up there she could see everything. The firing ranges, the training fields, the barracks, the open sky stretching beyond the wire. Years ago, this place had been a cage. Now it was a garden. She heard footsteps behind her. Couldn't sleep either. Chief Rains, coffee in hand, jacket half-zipped, his face as weathered as the base itself. Sarah smiled faintly. "Morning, Chief." He leaned against the railing beside her. "You know, when I first saw you, I thought you were gonna be trouble." She chuckled. "I was." "Still are," he said, sipping his coffee. "Just the good kind now." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb. "Commander Maddox sent word," Rains said finally. "He's retiring next month. Asked if you'd attend the ceremony." Sarah's smile faded a little. "He deserves peace. He carried us all longer than he should have." Rains nodded. "He said you already gave him his closure." She looked at him, curious. "When?" "The day you went into that storm," he said. Said watching you do what you did reminded him why he believed in people like us in the first place." Her eyes dropped to the ground. "I didn't do anything special." He shook his head. "That's the thing, you did it quietly." Later that morning, Sarah led her final field exercise of the quarter. The recruits moved like one body now, disciplined, alert, coordinated. Tours called ranges. Hayes oversaw tactics. Elena Ruiz, now Corporal Ruiz, commanded her first fire team. Watching them, Sarah felt something rare, contentment without pride. When the last round was fired and the cease command echoed, she gathered them in a semicircle. "You all did well," she said. "Better than most units I've seen in real combat." The recruits smiled, shifting proudly, waiting for more. "But remember," she continued, "combat isn't just out there, it's in here." She tapped her chest. "In how you treat people, how you handle fear, how you lead when no one's watching." Her tone softened. "Someday, you'll find yourself in a situation where the easy thing will be to shout, to act, to fire first. Don't. Pause, listen. Strength doesn't vanish in silence, it's born there." Elena's eyes glimmered, she understood. The others would in time. Sarah nodded once, dismissed. The field erupted in chatter, laughter, relief, the kind of energy that only comes from having earned exhaustion. Rains watched from the tower, pride quietly blooming behind his stoic expression. That evening the base held a small ceremony, informal, warm, unannounced. The recruits had painted a mural on the side of the hangar, a silhouette of a soldier standing under a rising sun. Underneath it, in uneven but determined brushstrokes, were the words, "Strength speaks softly." Sarah laughed when she saw it. It wasn't military regulation. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Tors presented it awkwardly. "We figured it's kinda your thing." She smiled. "It's more than mine, it's yours now." Elena stepped forward, holding out a small wooden box. "We all chipped in," she said shyly. Inside was a polished brass casing, identical to the one Sarah had kept since the day of her reactivation. But this one was engraved. "For the woman who taught us silence has aim." Sarah's throat tightened. For a moment she couldn't speak. She closed the lid carefully and looked at them all, these soldiers, this family she hadn't expected to find. "You'll never know," she said softly, "what this means." Hayes smirked faintly. "We might have a guess." Laughter rippled through the group, easy and genuine. And for once Sarah laughed with them, not politely, not reservedly, but freely. It sounded strange to her, foreign. But it felt like home. Later that night the sky was clear. The stars hung low, and the wind carried the faint hum of crickets through the base. Sarah sat on the same wall where it all began, where she'd once sat alone, broken and ignored. Now the air was filled with quiet life. The distant echo of laughter, the creak of boots, the murmur of belonging. She reached into her pocket and took out both casings, the one from that stormy rescue, and the new one the recruits had given her. She held them together in her palm, their weight balanced, equal. Old and new. Past and present. Pain and peace. She didn't need to keep them forever. She just needed to remember why she had. "Permission to sit, ma'am." Elena's voice, gentle, respectful. Sarah nodded, "Always." Elena sat beside her, knees drawn up, eyes on the stars. "I used to think soldiers had to be fearless," she said quietly. Sarah smiled. "Fear, just proof you still care about living." Elena thought about that. "So what do we do with it?" "Carry it," Sarah said. "The trick isn't to lose fear, it's to move anyway." They sat in silence for a long time, 2 generations of the same fight, bound not by war but by understanding. After a while Elena whispered, "Do you ever miss it? The field, the missions, the adrenaline?" Sarah took a slow breath, the night wind cool on her face. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't miss what it took from me." "What did it take?" "Noise," Sarah said softly. "Noise in my head, in my heart. It made me forget that peace isn't the absence of fight. It's the mastery of it." Elena nodded, eyes distant, thoughtful. When Elena finally left, Sarah stayed behind, watching the sky shift from deep blue to silver. The moonlight stretched across the range, touching every scarred piece of ground she'd once bled and trained on. She thought about the girl she'd been when she first arrived, tense, haunted, half alive. And about the woman she was now, quiet, steady, whole. The difference wasn't in strength, it was in purpose. She'd spent so long waiting for someone to tell her who she was allowed to be. Now she realized she didn't need anyone's permission anymore. The world outside might still be noisy, cruel, indifferent. But inside her there was calm. And maybe that was victory enough. At dawn, she rose before the base stirred. She walked to the training field one last time, boots leaving faint prints in the damp earth. In the center of the range, she knelt and buried the two brass casings beneath the soil, one from her past, one from her present. A quiet ritual. Not to forget, but to let go. As she pressed the dirt over them, the narrator's voice would come in, low, steady, almost reverent. Every soldier buries something. Some bury pain, some bury pride. And some bury the sound of who they used to be. Not to erase it, but to make room for silence that can finally heal. She stood, brushing the soil from her hands, and looked toward the rising sun. It was brighter than usual that morning. The kind of light that didn't blind, it revealed. Rain's voice called from the distance, "Coffee's hot, Campbell." She smiled, "On my way." As she walked back toward the hangar, the camera would hold on the field, the faint wind stirring the soil where the casings lay, sunlight glinting for just a moment like two small stars beneath the earth. Then fade to black. And over that final stillness, the narrator would whisper the story's closing line, the one she'd earned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it's done, it leaves behind silence strong enough to teach the world what courage sounds like.